President, I rise today to discuss the deteriorating situation in Iraq. There has been considerable debate in recent days about what we want to achieve in that country and the importance of achieving so-called political reconciliation in Baghdad. I would like to propose three simple principles that should guide any action we take in Iraq. Number one, we should do everything possible to secure our people. Number two, we should defend our national security interests. And number three, we should not partner with the Islamic Republic of Iran. First and foremost, Madam President, we need to be certain that we are doing everything humanly possible to secure the Americans who are still in Iraq. The instability of the situation in the north of that country could quickly devolve into nationwide chaos, and it requires our immediate attention. We need to be developing and implementing an immediate plan to get out all non-essential American personnel, to get them to safety now. I am deeply concerned, as all of us should be, that our people on the ground will become pawns in a sectarian conflict that we cannot control. I am concerned that the up to 275 Marines who may be deployed to assist in embassy security, along with the 300 additional military advisors that President Obama announced today, will also become targets, isolated in Baghdad. It is not at all reassuring to have the security in Baghdad provided by either Shia militias, loosely controlled by the al-Maliki government, or by the Iranian Quds, forces themselves or their agents. If we have to rely on either to keep our people safe, we should not be there. Let me repeat that. If we have to rely on either to keep our people safe, we should not be there. Second, we need to define and then to defend the national security interest of the United States in Iraq. There has been extensive discussion of, quote, political reconciliation in Iraq, and of making any American military action contingent on achieving that ephemeral objective. This makes no sense. Although a political solution to Iraq's troubles might have been an appropriate goal in 2005 or 2011, it simply may not be feasible in 2014. The time for this sort of argument would have been 3 years ago, when America was the most influential voice in Baghdad, and we were completing our largest embassy on the planet on the banks of the Tigris River. But we chose to relinquish that influence when we did not successfully negotiate a status of forces agreement with the Iraqis. Much of the blame for that diplomatic impasse lies with the al-Maliki government, but the Obama administration bears considerable responsibility as well. The president campaigned on, quote, ending the war in Iraq, which he defined by removing all of our forces, not winning. So immediate troop withdrawal, not negotiating a proper status of forces agreement, was the priority. In the words of Secretary Clinton on CNN on Tuesday, quote, we did not get it done. And the result is that today we have little or no influence in Baghdad. Madam President, it is not my purpose today to relitigate the history of U.S. involvement in Iraq, but rather to propose what we can do with the circumstances in which we find ourselves right now. given our current circumstances. Any attempt to reconcile a Sunni Shiite religious conflict that has waged for more than 1,500 years seems either the height of hubris or naivete, or both. Rather than prioritizing an unachievable political solution that we have no power to effect, it seems much more practical to focus on what is in the actual national security interest of the United States of America. The most acute security threat to the United States in Iraq is the aggressive movement of the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, ISIS forces, out of Syria and into Iraq over the last 6 months. These vicious Sunni fanatics may be relatively small in number, but they make up for it in sheer brutality. Although President Obama dismissed their aggression into Fallujah in January of this year as the terrorist equivalent of the, quote, junior varsity, recent events suggest that they are of a much higher capability. Indeed, an obvious question that the administration should answer is, has the Obama administration ever armed ISIS? Has the administration given lethal weapons to ISIS? We are doing so to rebels who are fighting alongside ISIS in Syria. And it's an obvious question to ask whether we have in fact armed these radical Islamic terrorists as well. ISIS is much more than a local or even a regional threat. They are among the worst of the radical jihadis who attacked us on September 11th, 2001, and again on September 11th, 2012. They are so bad, in fact, that the, quote, core al-Qaeda, as President Obama likes to call the terrorist cells in Pakistan and Afghanistan, have renounced them. Their goal is to establish a new Islamic caliphate in the Middle East and Northern Africa, from Syria to Iraq. And they have publicly announced that when they achieve their ambitions in Syria and Iraq, their goal is to move on to Jordan, to Israel, and to the United States of America. Because of their actions and their stated intent, it would seem that a targeted mission to seriously degrade the lethality of ISIS could well be in the national security interest of the United States. Such an action would not require the commitment of American combat forces, but it would require a commitment from the commander-in-chief that this action would not be merely a symbolic message or an effort simply to perpetuate the al-Maliki government in Baghdad. Instead, it would need to be an expeditious and emphatic demonstration of America's ability to strike at the terrorists at the time and means of our choosing. If the President needs to respond to an imminent threat to the national security interest of the United States, or to act to an imminent threat to the lives of Americans in Iraq, he has the constitutional authority to do so. However, Congress has the constitutional authority to declare war. So if the President is planning on launching a concerted offensive attack that is not constrained by the exigency of the circumstances, he should come to Congress first to seek and to receive authorization for the use of military force. A precondition for any such mission in Iraq should be the utter rejection of any partnership with the Islamic Republic of Iran, on which the al-Maliki government is increasingly dependent. Iran has been the implacable enemy of the United States since 1979. when revolutionaries took 54 American citizens hostage for 444 days, some of the darkest days of our history. Earlier this year, Iran demonstrated that this rabid anti-American hostility is alive and well by trying to receive a U.S. visa for one of these hostage takers to serve as their ambassador to the United Nations, to live in Manhattan with diplomatic immunity. Madam President, it was one of my proudest days in the U.S. Senate to introduce the legislation countering this action that passed unanimously through both houses of Congress and that was signed into law by President Obama, stopping known terrorists from entering the United States. When push comes to shove, the American people understand that Iran is our enemy. We need to bring that same clarity, that same bipartisan unity to current circumstances in Iraq. Just because Iran fears the ISIS jihadists, it does not follow that we should partner with them in this fight. The enemy of our enemy, in this instance, is not our friend. If we cannot secure our people absent Iranian involvement, we need to get them out. If we cannot strike ISIS in Iraq without Iranian involvement, then we need to look for another means of doing so. ISIS consists of radical Islamic terrorists who seek to murder Americans. And yet the Iranian regime has over and over again demonstrated the same hostile intent. Indeed, it is the leading sponsor of terrorism across the world. Madam President, it is deeply concerning that not only Secretary of State John Kerry, but also former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel have all signaled in recent days that they are actively interested in exploring a partnership with Iran to deal with Iraq. Indeed, today, President Obama publicly suggested, quote, Iran can play a constructive role. This is the height of foolishness. It is deeply disturbing that so many current and former senior Obama administration officials would share this same misguided and naive view. There could be no more ill-advised or counterproductive policy for the United States at this moment than to partner with the Islamic Republic of Iran. Rather than partnering with Iran, we should be all the more mindful of the dangers of taking our eye off the ball of Iran's nuclear program, as no doubt Tehran hopes that we will in this most recent crisis. As grim as the threat of ISIS is, it pales by comparison to the threat of a nuclear-armed Iran, given their long and well-documented history of state-sponsored terrorism. Indeed, Iran is working now and has been working for years right now to develop nuclear ICBMs for one reason and one reason only, and that is to strike at America and potentially to murder millions of Americans. It would be the height of folly to take any action in Iraq that would further embolden Iran, which is already moving to make Iraq a client state in its pursuit of regional hegemony. We already know how that script plays out. We've seen it in our ally Ukraine, where former President Viktor Yanukovych acted as Vladimir Putin's stooge and planted pro-Russian agents throughout the Ukrainian government and armed forces. But the Ukrainian people refused to accept Russia's attempt to reintegrate them into a 21st century reincarnation of the Soviet Union. They stood up in the Maidan Square, a place I visited just a few weeks ago, and they braved the freezing cold. They braved the murderous army snipers who shot the protesters down in that square, and they stood and demanded freedom. They demanded to stand with America, with Europe and the West. Iran, in its attempt to create a modern version, a new version of the Persian Empire, has attempted a similar play on behalf of so-called Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei through the means of the Iraqi regime of Nouri al-Maliki. Sadly, Iranian forces today permeate both the government of Iraq and the Iraqi security forces. America has demonstrated, beyond any shadow of doubt, our offer of liberty to the people of Iraq. Indeed, thousands of our sons and daughters have given their lives in pursuit of freedom in Iraq. But if the Iraqi government is more interested in forging a relationship with Iran than with the United States, we should not and we cannot attempt to force them to adhere to our political goals for them. Absent active partners in Iraq who want a closer alliance with America and with our allies, our key objective should be quite simply to secure our people, to counter active terrorist threats to our national security, and to make sure we do not further embolden the Islamic Republic of Iran. These objectives, not the fantasy of resolving the Sunni-Shiite conflict that has been raging since the death of Muhammad in 632 AD, or the illusion that we can magically find productive common ground with Iran, should define our policy towards Iraq. I'd like to make one final note. It is my hope that my colleagues will think more broadly about what's happening in the world, in Iraq, in Iran, in Russia, in Libya. We are being faced with terrible options that have been created by the bad choices our leaders have made. Those guiding our foreign policy at the White House, at the State Department, and even, unfortunately, here in the United States Senate, have refused to address the true dangers posed to Americans at home and abroad. Bad choices inevitably leave us with bad options. Refusing to recognize the radical religious extremism of individuals who are committed to jihad and have pledged to murder Americans is a bad choice. Refusing to utter the words radical Islamic terrorists is a bad choice. Negotiating with terrorists to release terrorist leaders is a bad choice. And considering any kind of deal with Iran is a very bad choice. In the last 5 years, America has receded from leadership in the world. And into that vacuum have stepped nations like Iran, like Russia, like China. As we've abandoned our allies, the consequence has been to make the world a much, much more dangerous place. America's leadership has never been more critical than it is today. And until the leaders of our government stop making these bad choices, we will continue to be left with bad options. Thank you.